Hi, and welcome to a Canadian Equality Consulting Coffee Chat. This is Marcy Haranik here, and thank you for joining me again for our short little coffee chats. Today I'm going to be talking about kind of part two of how to recognize and support people that may be experiencing domestic violence at your workplace. So part one really talked about this issue generally. It also talked about the importance of supporting an employee going through domestic violence and also how you can recognize that, especially in a work from home environment where it can be trickier and it can be more subtle and nuanced. So for part two of this conversation, I've also been trying out different virtual backgrounds here, so I hope you enjoy this one. But for part two of this conversation, I want to talk a bit about, as an employer, what you are mandated to do in a situation where an employee may be experiencing domestic violence, and even what you're mandated to do as an employer to prevent an employee from experiencing this, or to assist them before you even know that they may be experiencing domestic violence. So, for instance, we're going to talk about occupational health and safety law. And then we're also going to touch on some things that you should be doing as an employer. So let's start with occupational health and safety law, which was recently revised and updated in Alberta, I think a couple of years ago. So the Occupational Health and Safety Act was revised to add the addition of domestic violence as a workplace hazard. This then requires workplaces and employers to have policies and procedures and processes in place. So as an employer, you are required under law to have a domestic violence in the workplace policy and procedures and different processes in place that need to be reviewed and potentially updated every 3 years. And this includes a domestic violence prevention plan, but then also a domestic violence plan if you have an employee that is experiencing that, so a plan to support them. So this also requires that all of your employees, and it doesn't say just HR or just the leaders, it says all employees must be trained in recognizing domestic violence, in understanding those policies and procedures and processes that you're required to have in place, and also procedures for responding and reporting and documenting. So with this update to the Act, there's also an update to the Alberta Employment Standards Code, which now provides up to 10 days of a paid domestic violence leave. So if you are an employee that may be, or you have an employee that may be experiencing domestic violence, they can take up to 10 days, doesn't have to all be at once, it can be incremental or at different times, up to 10 days off for their own needs, whatever that may be. That is fabulous, and I think that's a much needed improvement to that code. It is tricky though, because it requires that employee to disclose to you in order to use that particular leave, which is problematic. So if you have you have that leave available, and maybe introduce a policy of no questions asked, just request that leave, and make sure that employee knows that you're here to support them. They don't have to tell you or disclose or give you reasons or anything like that, but just let them go with it. And that can sometimes be the best way to support them at that time. So what do these legal changes and code updates look like in practice? So they look like you have to basically formulate and develop a domestic violence policy. And a good way to do this, and I just want to recognize that a lot of the information that I'm sharing today is from a few different resources, from the YWCA, from the Alberta Council of Women's Shelters, and also CEGES, which informed a lot of part one of our coffee chat. And they have some incredible resources on their website in the section called Real Talk, where they go into where you can get more information on this training, on domestic violence training, and also support in developing the policies. Another good resource is also CWA, the Calgary Immigrant Women's Association. They also have a lot of fantastic resources on their site, and if you contact them. So what they recommend is to establish a multidisciplinary workplace team. So gather people from a wide variety of areas in your workplace, bring them together on a team or a committee to task them to do research and consultations and develop this domestic violence policy and procedures, and make sure that they are done in collaboration with community. So reach out to these service provider agencies, reach out to experts on domestic violence like CEGES and CWA and the Alberta Council of Women's Shelters or YWCA. Use their knowledge and their assistance when you're doing this policy development to make sure that you get it right and it's done respectfully. Not only is it important to use them and to create this committee to develop this, but also develop additional resources and have them available on your website so that all employees can see them. And not just on your internal website, but also on your external website, public facing. Make sure that all employees have access to this training and that they actually complete the training, so have some accountability there on recognizing and responding to domestic violence, and also training specifically on those policies and procedures that you have created and have made available. Make sure that all staff receive this training and this workshop regularly, and update it as you need to. And even host awareness raising activities in your workplace. Around November is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. May 5th is the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls Recognition Day. So think about those commemorative dates and see if you can plan activities or workshops or additional training around that. And when you're developing your policies and your procedures, make sure that you include information in there around confidentiality. Link it or include information if you have an employee assistance program or any sort of employer-sponsored counseling services. Ensure it includes that leave option, those 10 days for domestic violence. Ensure that you also link it to flexible work options if that employee could benefit from that. And also include referrals. So when you're working with these outside community experts and organizations, include them right in those procedures and those policies of where to go for more information or exactly where you can refer an employee to if they need support or help. And make sure that you continuously review your procedures and your policies. And make sure you have procedures in place if an employee does come to you, right, and discloses and is aware of the policy and they come to you to disclose. Make sure, again, you don't tell them what to do in that situation. Make sure you give them options and give them back the control so that they can make their own decision. So for instance, go through the policy with them and the options and the way that you can support them, but then also ask them, what do you need? How can I really help you? And if it's outside the bounds of your workplace policies and procedures, and it's beyond your knowledge or your expertise, then make sure you have that list of referrals and who to connect them with in order to receive that help, and make sure that they get it and make sure that you follow up with them. Also discuss what is within your control, what you can do to help. Does this employee need parking close to the building? Do they need underground parking? Or does that prove to be more of a hazard to them? Can you have them arrange carpooling for them or an escort to kind of walk them to and from the building if they need it on certain days? Also ensure with their consent for all of this, if you have front desk security and locking doors, that they're able and that they are aware of where all the exits are and where they could go for help if the abuser shows up at the workplace. You can leave a photograph of the abuser with your front desk security so that they can be immediately aware of when they show up and that they know what to do when they do show up. Also chat if you need to move that employee's office or desk further away from the public facing entrance. Make sure any sort of reception folks are aware of what to do if the abuser phones. Rather than just always patching them through to that person, or if they ask the reception person to provide updates on exactly what that person is doing or where they are, have a plan in place so that they know how to respond. So all of these sort of emergency responses are incredibly important and must be included when you're also developing, your policies. Also, an important note that CWA mentions is that make sure if the person is a new immigrant and if they're on a visa, often visas are dependent on partners or family members. So you can ask them if they have that type of visa, and then you can change that visa with them to be dependent on the workplace, on the employer. So it takes that element of control away from that family member or abuser in that case, and gives it to the workplace. Also, if you have a large workplace, it would be really beneficial to have a workplace emergency hotline phone number for employees to call, and that's good for any sort of safety reason. There's also a provincial government hotline that you can provide to that employee, and make sure you can get it pre-programmed into their cell phone, in their work cell phone or their personal one. Their work cell phone may be safer because it wouldn't be as closely monitored necessarily as the personal one. But again, it depends on the situation. So those are some of key recommendations that were informed by best practices from SAGES and from CWA and YWCA and the Alberta Council of Women's Shelters. And I hope that this can be incredibly valuable to you. If you need help reaching out to those organizations, or you're looking for that specific domestic violence related training, reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to connect you with them and put you in touch with the experts that can deliver that specific training for your workplace, and also help with that policy and procedural development. So again, we're here to help, and thank you so much for joining.